dialogue, so please be respectful, and this should be a very interesting discussion. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeanette.
Yeah, good morning also from me. It's my role to introduce our panelists. We have two representatives from government. First, Ms. Ana Cristina Amoroso Neves from Portugal. She is the head of international affairs at the Knowledge Society Agency with the Ministry of Science. Then we have Mr. William Tevi over there. Oh, she's here, by the way. I forgot to mention that. So Mr. William Tevi, he's the Director General of the National Information Technology Agency of Ghana. Then we have from the technical and the business community, Patrick Falstrom, a senior consulting engineer with Cisco Systems. And we have Raúl Echeverría over there, Executive Director of LACNIC, the Internet Address Registry for Latin America and the Caribbean. Then we have two speakers from civil society. Henriette Esterhuisen from APC couldn't make it. Instead, we have Joy Lidicode, also from APC. And we have finally Parminder. He is with IT for Change from India. We thought we don't do introductory statements. What we would like to do instead is go through all the issues that have been proposed for as issues for improvement. And we thought we ask our panelists to discuss these issues, and the audience can chip in at any point. Before we do that, we thought we ask Patrick to set the scene for those who are new to the process, because Patrick has been with the IGF and the IGF improvement process from early on. So, Patrick, why don't you start?
Thank you very much. Patrick Falstrom is my name, and as Jeanette said, from the technical community here. So what I would like to try to explain is what we have done so far and where we are. The whole process regarding IGF started in 2005 and is based on the outcome of the WSIS process and the Tunis Agenda. So that is where the whole IGF process is anchored. The IGF was created with something called the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group, and that is one of the things that I'm coming back to, a chair and a secretariat. The Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group, or MAG, is the smaller group that have been sort of, from a normal conference perspective, has been hosting the yearly conferences and many open consultations on top of the internal meetings that MAG has had. The MAG itself has been running under the Chatham House rules with individuals as participants. So what has been discussed in the MAG and in the IGF process has to do with both the agenda for the upcoming IGF meeting, the summary of the previous IGF meeting, the IGF process itself, and this is one of the issues I think we should discuss today, how effective that has been. But what has been discussed is also the IGF process itself, and specifically the format of the open consultations, the MAG meetings, the IGF meetings, the operations of the Secretariat, appointment of MAG members and other officials. So that has been part of the discussions. So just like all other organizations, I think it's important to remember that the MAG and the IGF process has evolved over time. So when we're talking about having the CSTD working group on IGF improvements, it's not the case that the IGF has been static for these 5 years and then suddenly we are trying to make a change. In some areas, there have been agreements to changes and changes has been done. In some other areas, there have been agreements that there are problems, but we have not reached agreements what to change to. In some areas, there are not agreements that there are problems. And because of that, we have also not been able to change anything. In some areas, there have been agreements that things work very well, and no changes have been made, of course. So what has now happened is that this change process that has been discussed in the IGF and in MAG is now happening in more places, not only at the IGF meetings. And one of the things that is discussed is how effective this is to discuss it in multiple fora. The CSTD has the working group on improvements of the IGF process. So that is one area where things are discussed, and then we're discussing it here as part of the IGF as well. And some people, like me personally, think that splitting up discussing things in multiple locations is something that is not very effective because people get confused, and we're discussing more where to discuss the problems than discussing the problems. And I think we need to reach agreements on how to move forward.
Patrick, you might mention the status of the working group too. It might be of interest.
Yeah, the status of the working group is that it was running and was supposed to deliver to the CSTD this spring. It delivered to the CSTD a chairman's summary, and it is now extended. So that's where we are. So the working group on IGF improvements is still ongoing. Yeah. It was up until a year ago something also on top of all of this some uncertainty of the existence of the IGF, which is now, as we all know, resolved by the decision in the UN General Assembly on a 5-year extension of the IGF itself. So let me stop there and let others chime in. Thanks.
Thank you, Patrick. We want to go through these various issues, as I said before, and our goal is to sort of present the various opinions we have on each of these issues. And if we are lucky and have a constructive discussion, perhaps at the end we can at least see where we have common ground among the diversity of speakers and in the audience as well. So the first issue we thought we'd like to discuss concerns diversity of participation, including developing country stakeholder participation. So who of our panelists would like to speak up on that topic? What exactly needs improvement? What would you suggest? And of course, why would you make such specific suggestion? Raoul.
Hi, thank you. I think that the participation in IGF is an issue that is not easy to solve. There are many things that we have to consider. One of them is probably that what is the priority? How priority is the IGF for people, governments, and other stakeholders from all the countries around the world? For example, now we are meeting here in Africa, and so we have a broader participation from Africa. But we have, for example, less participants from Latin America or from Asia, maybe. And this is because probably those stakeholders from those regions are also participating in other things, and they have to spend their limited resources, and they have to prioritize what forums they will attend. And so this is something that we will not change from here. The other thing is the difficulty because the travels. So since it is very good that that IGF rotate and meets every year in different regions, this is a very positive thing, and this is something that we should not change in any way. And so this is, as I said before, having a meeting in Africa gives more opportunity for Africans to participate. Having a meeting in Latin America provides more opportunities for Latin Americans to participate. But I think that the only way to, in my view, to improve the participation is through the regional meetings. So the limitations that I said before, I think that's the most productive way to have more people involved in IGF is through the regional meetings. For example, we organize preparatory meetings in Latin America, and we have always more than 100 people from 20-something countries. And it is a participation that we will not have anyway in a meeting in Kenya. So the regional meetings are many times more important than the IGF itself, if you see those meetings as part of the process.
Does everybody agree here that not much can be done about the main IGF session, but that we should focus on the regionals? Please, Mr. Tevi.
Yes, I mean, from our example also from West Africa, we've also had some West Africa IGF meetings, which has been really patronized by the countries in West Africa Ivory Coast, Nigeria, and the Gambia and co. And we've also had local Ghanaian IGF meetings, which has also attracted more than 100 people where we discuss various topics. So like Raul said, sometimes it's difficult for us to be able to send quite a quantity of people to the normal IGFs, but when we do it regionally or locally, it's actually very, very important for us to be able to, spread the number of people who can actually participate. In Ghana, for example, the National Communication Authority actually has a slot for about 5 to 6 people every year for the IGFs, but locally we also have every year an IGF which attracts more than 100 to 200 people. Yeah.
Thank you. I hope you don't mind if I privilege the panel for the time being. Okay, then ask him a question.
I'll make it quick. Where does that take us? If we have the regional participation and it's a great idea, do you go to those meetings and then you bring to this meeting the regional perspectives? And if so, is that properly represented? How do we grapple with that? Because that's really interesting.
I think this is another topic that we have to talk about, how to improve the way in which we channel the inputs from the regional meetings. I think that this is an area of, a clear area of improvement in IGF. So we are doing that now, but we can do that better, as we should find the ways to bring in a more effective way the inputs from the regional meetings.
Thank you. Yeah, I was about to disagree on the point which the lady over there made, that about making it regional IGFs versus the global IGF. And that takes me back to my principal point on participation. It is about participation is determined by to what avail, what issues are being discussed and to what avail. I mean, if you're discussing growing mangoes, certain kind of farmers will go there. If you're discussing trade issues, certain kind of people go there. And therefore, we need to know what is it that is being discussed, and that will determine participation. And second, as importantly, to what avail. After discussing, what happens? For me, participation in the IGF is the antecedent issues to participation issue in the IGF is, and I believe that about the global regional thing, that internet is a global entity, and most people here agree. There are global issues of its governance which cannot be broken down to regional or national levels, and people generally agree. And therefore, they need a global resolution. And right now, decisions are being taken about the architecture of the internet, which are not being taken in a participatory and a democratic manner. Now, that's a principal proposition. If we agree to that, and if we don't agree to that, it's difficult to go further down, but to whatever extent we agree to that, then we need a set of some kind of a policy mechanism to be able to taking those decisions. And if we have a policy mechanism which takes those decisions, and I can discuss what those decisions could be about, then comes the issue that, yes, those decisions have to be taken in a democratic, participatory manner with every view represented, every voice heard, and everybody's democratic rights given space. So to me, the IGF's participation is determined by what happens here, what issues get discussed, and to what avail. And the kind of people I would want to talk about the participation of, which is the marginalized groups, which are more than half of the world's population, they need to know what are those issues which will be addressed here and whether they will get solved. So I understand that the participation issue is linked to what happens in the IGF and whether there is a link of IGF to the kind of democratic policy-making mechanisms which do not seem to exist at present, and those decisions are right now being taken by private corporates, by a group of rich countries, and that itself is not democratic. So you don't have a backward linkage of the right kind of participation.
So what you're saying is not participation for the sake of it, but in the context of concrete policy issues you want to see addressed.
Yeah, and the participation is always with reference to them. I mean, other than academics who would have an interesting take on things, people want to push a policy agenda in a positive manner, and they should see something coming out from that.
Patrick is next.
Yeah, I think the whole discussion about participation is quite complicated, and the question from Patrice on where do the input and ideas from the regional IGFs be taken, we have to remember that the ideas that are taken up regionally is not only to be moved to some kind of central spot and then distributed again. It's rather the case that many of the ideas that is actually brought up locally probably stay locally and go to governments, and are distributed among the stakeholder groups in that local environment. So what is happening in this multi-stakeholder discussions we have is that we see that ideas are floating around in a more mesh-like scheme in sort of a peer-to-peer environments, which is so popular nowadays on the internet. So it is more complicated than just saying that all information ideas must be moved to one central spot and then distributed. That is not the world anymore. And then one more thing that we should not forget is the ability, with the help of internet, to do remote participation, both offline via email and written statements, and also direct participation like we have at this meeting now. Thank you.
What I really like about technical metaphors such as mesh-like streams, that the whole mess we have looks much more orderly. So thank you for this image. I think it helps us. Anna is next.
Thank you very much. I just would like to reinforce the role of the regional and the national IGFs. So IGF should continue in its current format as it has been a real success. It has encouraged regional and national IGFs, increased remote participation, promoted the dialogue and mutual understanding, and helped to clarify issues that seemed very complex and confusing at the outset. Where was written in the Tunis agenda that regional or national IGFs should be set up? I don't see it there. So it was boosted because IGF worked and is working. So everybody considered that IGF was a very rich format that should be replicated. So the criticism that we normally hear about IGF, I think it's more because some persons, some stakeholders, they don't have money to be at the IGF or be at the preparation or at the consultations for the IGF, for the annual IGF. But you cannot say that the IGF didn't work, because in fact this replication of the IGF, it's so interesting because it is something that replicates the dynamics and the interests at regional level. Thank you. Thank you. So when you have a regional or a national IGF, you are doing something for your region, for your country, and you are discussing the themes that are more important for your country, whether you are what's so-called a developed, an emerging, a developing country. So I think that the most important thing here is twofold. One is that if we don't have more participation from some countries, it's because there is no money for such participation. And secondly, we should really focus on this replication of the IGF format, because this is something that was not written down. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. The funding issue we will address a bit later, but we will certainly remember it. Now, Joy wants to speak.
Thank you. And I'd just like to echo the point of my colleague, which has just been made. I think in terms of the question about how to grow participation, I think this is an issue not only for civil society in terms of resources, but also for private sector and indeed governments, for all participants, and that perhaps one of the concrete suggestions that APC has made in order to foster and support some of the regional IGFs which have begun to blossom and flourish, as you say, in response to the constructive forum the IGF provides, is to perhaps link the coordination or the establishment of those with the UN regional offices themselves. so that, for example, in the Pacific there is a regional office, in Asia there is a regional office, in order to support those IGF forums, and they are spaces which governments, civil society, and to some extent private sector are also familiar with as spaces. I echo also I'd support the comment about peer-to-peer and mesh environments. Indeed, the regional and national IGFs are still blossoming and blooming. There are still each year new national IGFs which take place, and they take place because in local contexts people see these forums as something useful for them. So I would caution on the one hand from seeking to democratise and encourage the flourishing of IGF spaces, to turning those somehow into spaces which must drive up towards a global IGF, when in fact that's not necessarily the way in which they are constructed.
Thank you, Joy. I think we had a few people who wanted to comment as well. Please introduce yourself.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have Bill Smith and Bob Pepper and
Yeah.
Luis? Yes.
Sure. This is Bill Smith.
Oh, and Bertrand. Okay.
I'm with PayPal. I wanted to respond to some comments that, if I heard correctly from Parminder, around architectural decisions of the internet are not being made in a democratic and participatory manner. I have personally been involved with both the IETF, the W3C, and other of the technical standard setting organizations related to the internet, and there are many of them. They each have their own set of processes and procedures. The IETF, which does the bulk of the standards related to the internet, and the W3C, which is more specifically web-oriented, both use a consensus-based approach. The IETF is itself open, transparent, and equitable and inclusive. Anyone who wishes to may participate. There are no obstacles to participation. There are no fees. Their meetings are held, I believe, 3 times a year, 1-week meetings. They rotate around the globe, making it possible for people to be able to get to meetings. In addition, they use the telephone, internet, conference calls. I myself have been on conference calls at any hour of the day, regardless of where I am on the globe and traveling. Accommodations are made for all participants in all of the groups that I participate in, so that anyone can participate from anywhere. And so the use of a combination of the face-to-face meetings, which I think is always a beneficial thing, to sit down, speak with people, get to know them personally, break bread with them, very important, so that when you continue the dialogues via teleconference or email, you can understand where an individual is coming from. But the consensus-based approach, for me, is in fact far better than democracy. It is much harder to reach consensus. Unanimity, that's the true definition of it. It's much more difficult and takes more time, frequently, to reach consensus. But it does get everyone who participates to a point of agreement. And that's, I think, extremely important.
Why don't we take some of the questions and then let
Okay, let's just collect. Pamina, let's please collect a few comments.
Just because he asked the question is a clarification I'm offering, because he proceeded from something which I said, which is not
Okay.
correct. Can I?
Yes.
Okay, so I should actually, every time I speak, should clarify that I'm not talking about technical and operational matters. The WSIS and Tunis agenda clearly separates technical and operational matters of the internet and the public policy issues. And I don't have great problems with the manner in which the internet's technical architecture gets negotiated at present. I have some, but we can talk about it. But I am talking about the internet social system, a larger social system, and public policies issues around it. And if somebody don't think they are issues, they want to know what those issues are, go to the OECD Internet Policy Making Mechanisms, go to COE Policy Making Mechanisms, and you will know the whole ecology of those issues which I'm referring to, and not the IETF kind of
Before
issues.
we get now onto a completely different discussion, I'd just like to remind the audience that diversity of participation is the issue we're addressing right now. So you can take this outside if you want, but we don't discuss this matter here right now, at least as far as I'm concerned. So Bob Pepper's next.
Thank you. I will try to refrain from Parmender's comment about, I do think it's relevant in terms of participation. And there's really multiple dimensions of participation. We're talking at the moment, or we started talking about geographic participation, and then being able to leverage the regional IGFs to improve and extend the geographical participation. These have been great. The points about IGF being a rich format, I'd also say it's a dynamic format. Because we've had the opportunity within IGF to have a lot of issues raised. And one of the reasons that we've been able to raise those issues is because we don't take votes. It's not a decisional, because sometimes the issues that are raised have other forums for resolution. But we have an entire agenda looking at sustainability. There's a dynamic workshop on gender participation. I mean, these are not things that were in the original WSIS mandates, right? But we've had the opportunity to do that. So participation is both geographic, but the second part of the participation, which I think we need to talk about and do a better job, is within each of the various sectors, whether private sector, civil society, or government. No matter where we are geographically or where the annual meeting is, how do we improve the participation from across the whole spectrum of interested parties, individuals, organizations, academics, civil society. And I do think that part of we're doing a lot better. There are more people involved today than in the past. Part of this is education. Part of it's leveraging the technology, not only for participation, but also for making people aware of the IGF and the expansiveness and the dynamism of the agenda and the ability to bring new issues up at the IGF. And so that actually expands the participation. We need to talk about both of these dimensions.
Yeah, I think this is a very good point. Many people have pointed out that so many organizations never show up here, although it's relevant to them as well. The next one on the list here is Bertrand. Please keep it short if possible, because we have so many people who want to speak up.
I want to make two quick points. The first one is I'm very happy that Parminder made this clarification, because he is playing a role here which is keeping and establishing a standard of reference for democracy and accountability. That is a high standard which is needed, but that is implemented absolutely nowhere in the policy environment today. And what you're saying is actually a direct criticism of the existing international intergovernmental frameworks, and not at all a criticism of the technical frameworks. And in this respect, I think we're all in complete agreement. The second point I want to make is participation is one element. The key factor that we need to focus is to make sure that it is not only people that are represented, but viewpoints. It is essential to make sure that the diversity of viewpoints is represented. And sometimes the diversity of viewpoint can be represented by one person who do not come from that region or that group, but that convey this. And I want to insist on this distinction. It is not a delegation or hierarchical successive elections to a higher body. It's to make sure that the global, the regional, and the national have the diversity of viewpoints taken into account.
Thank you, Bertrand. I'd like to close the list now. I have another few people on the list. I've Louisa, and now the next one will be Anita, then Chuck, Belle, and Louise.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, please, go ahead.
In respect of discussions around global public policy, I would like us not to romanticize the local, especially since our lives are governed increasingly by the mesh, the analogy of the mesh that was forwarded. Here I think it's important to remember that neither are we celebrating the tyranny of the global or tyranny of the local, nor the totalitarianism of the global. I think we need to steer clear of both. And towards this, we need to actually look at existing models. I mean, we have the regional ECOSOCs, and then we have the global UN. And we need to also look at the fact that there are free trade agreements, bilateral agreements, and then still you have the WTO. And there is a tension here, and in respect of internet governance, the fact remains that we are seeking to do what is bottom-up, which does not preclude what may be central or centralized, because I don't think it's intrinsically a bad word, and our experience in running democracies like India at the decentralized level shows that a free-for-all decentralized bottom-up process is not necessarily completely inclusive, diverse, and ethical. Because at some level, I think we need to reconcile both so that neither is the local tyrannical nor the global totalitarian. I'd like to make just one more point, which is that I think democracy does not preclude consensus, but it takes into account the fact that the process of arriving at consensus is fraught with conflicts. And a resolution of the conflicts and dealing with that conflict and the contestations is what is important. And that needs ethical frameworks. And that needs us not just to play with the mesh that is free-flowing at the local, but the mesh as it is, you know, if you zoom out and look at the global picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Next, please, is Chuck.
Thanks. Chuck Gomes from VeriSign. I want to reinforce the value of the regional IGFs from a business point of view. And I'm kind of copying something that Jeff said actually in an earlier session. Businesses, small, medium, or large, really often don't have time, a lot of time to devote to things like this. So if we want to encourage them to participate, the regional opportunities, which tend to be briefer and closer, facilitate what businesses need. And again, I think that Joy made the point that this isn't just a civil society issue or a government issue, it's also a private sector issue.
Thank you, Chuck. Ballet, please. I don't know where you are. Oh, Bayer.
Thank you. This is Baher Asmat. I'm with ICANN. Just a quick point I want to make. I'd like to make a distinction between when we talk about participation and how to enhance participation, especially from developing countries. We always talk about what the IGF needs to do in terms of remote participation, in terms of funding, etc. And of course, the example of the regional national IGF is very important. But I want to also emphasize what we as stakeholders have to do when we go home. I mean, there is some homework that everyone has to do, because especially in developing countries, if there are not mechanisms and processes in place for stakeholders to take part in any internet policy processes at national level, it's very unlikely that those stakeholders will be able to contribute to the global internet governance discourse. And there are too many examples there. So I think what is important for developing countries, and I come from a developing country and I work in a developing region, there is an effort that needs to be exerted, more effort needs to be put in order to allow the broader stakeholder groups to take part in internet governance processes at national level. Only then the same stakeholders will have, whether business, civil society, etc., will have the opportunity, will have the competency to be able to participate in global processes. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Luis.
Yeah, Luis Magalhães from Portugal. Well, I'll first address a few practical suggestions, and then I will make some general comment. To begin with, let me just start with a disclaimer, in a sense, which is the fact that I believe that we already have very good standards in terms of participation and openness. So what I'm mentioning is just how it can be slightly improved. It's not a major breakthrough. So one of the things that actually I think we should do is that this interaction between the global and the regional and the national fora requires the adoption of certain processes and procedures. And for instance, so that they work in both directions, so that the regional and national fora feed into the global forum, and the global forum fits into the national and regional forum, not only at the annual global forum organization, but in the preparation processes and throughout the year in intersession. So one of the things that I think is needed is actually to convene representatives from spokespersons, like speak persons from the different national and regional fora, to get together with the MAG in intersession to contribute to preparation and to feed in and out contributions from both processes. If we have this organized moment, we certainly are establishing a very strong link between the two processes, and it is something that is achievable without, I think, too much trouble. The other thing regards the remote participation process, which is, of course, a way of somehow overcoming the difficulties that always exist of being, of everybody who wants to participate being present in person. As a matter of fact, IGF has set up quite an exceptional and remarkable, efficient way of remote hubs, which are an example to other instances. But the way the hubs are now working, they are mostly unidirectional, except that there is somebody who collects questions that come through the web and then voices it to the people who are attending the meetings. The technology now allows for a more interactive possibilities, and even for the people who are on the hubs to appear on the screen and speak to the plenaries. And I think that would also be very important to achieve that engagement. So this is also a very practical thing that can contribute to that. Now, the general observation I'd like to make to close is that actually it's going to be very short. It's actually the problem we have in what concerns participation and diversity. It's not as much that we have quite a lot to achieve on this direction, I think, because things have improved and we know how to carry on. The problem is that the discussion of the so-called improvements of the IGF are leading to the appearance of proposals that in certain cases limit the multi-stakeholder approach in terms of proposals that are advanced, and advance with ideas of making it more intergovernmental and more United Nations-like procedures. And that's where the problem, I think, is. I think we have to keep attention that this beautiful movement and quite productive in terms of interaction between people will pursue in an open and actually multi-stakeholder way. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. The transcript is stuck. Can anybody do anything about that?
So much information.
It's still captured, I hope. It's just not displayed. Yes. So that's fine then. We would like to now close that first issue, and I hand over to Jeff for the second one.
Okay. Thank you. And I do think we want to be sure we get any remote participant questions in. So why don't we introduce the next topic and then make sure we prioritize that. We next wanted to talk about the substantive program development of the IGF, including the MAG structure and process itself and the public consultation process. So I'll ask the panelists first if you have any comments about the development of the substantive areas being addressed by the IGF. Anyone? Anna? Yes? Okay.
Thank you. Well, on this issue, I think that sometimes people do some degree mix the multi-stakeholder process of IGF, where all stakeholders do explain to each other what their views are, with the actual decision-making process that each stakeholder group already run. So the point is that we do not know yet how to run a multi-stakeholder process effective. Each stakeholder group is on top of that having interest that the multi-stakeholder process is run according to the way their discussions have always been run. So bearing this in mind, IGF meetings should continue to be no-binding fora, free from constraints associated with attempts to reach consensus on negotiated documents, but to make dialogue within different stakeholders easier and more informed, seeking the development of social, political, and economic growth along with more shared knowledge that this setting allows. The MAG composition should be improved in order to be better understood by the community, because as far as I understood, it is not perceived in the best way. So bring more clarity to the prep processes, and should be provided a system of an annual turnover of at least 1/3 of its members. The multi-stakeholder nature of the MAG should continue with a balance of representatives on equal footing that will ensure that different people from different communities, continents, and countries will have a seat at the MAG, but the MAG should continue to exist.
Thank you, Anna. Joy?
Thanks, Jeff. A couple of offerings. Firstly, in terms of the excuse me, the initial term of the working group, I mean, there was a rich collection, a wide variety of suggested improvements in terms of making the IGF a more effective forum for dialogue that can indirectly influence policy. So I think it is important to not forget the rich ideas that have gone before, and to keep bringing them forward. And there may yet be some within those that we should recall. But very clearly also the sort of broad consensus was that the IGF should be a multi-stakeholder forum that can influence policies and build capacities, but that should not make policy. And I think APC's view is that, you know, the divergence of views among working group members centred more on the constitution of the MAG and the capturing of discussions at the IGF. And it might be useful to have discussions about the constitution of the MAG and how that can be enhanced and strengthened. But we think also that with effective chairing and the use of skilled facilitation, we can also ensure an appropriate confluence of those views in terms of recommending improvements. A concrete suggestion is that we think it would be helpful to more clearly distill the messages out of workshops and main sessions to facilitate collaboration amongst diverse stakeholders and institutions. So we would be hopeful that a recommendation could be made that the IGF communicates its most salient outcomes of main sessions and workshops, not only by way of a concluding chair's summary, so that it doesn't compromise the non-binding, non-recommendatory nature of the way in which multi-stakeholder groups are participating, but rather seeks to reveal those more richly so that they can be used in other processes.
Thanks, Troy. And we're going to be talking more about capturing the outcomes of the IGF, but Raul, you had a comment?
Yes, thank you. About the composition of the MAG. I think that the MAG was a good invention, and it has worked very well. There have not been a lot of substantial complaints about the composition of the MAG. Maybe some criticism at some point, but nothing really big. But it worked well because there was a secretariat that generated trust in all the stakeholders. So the first point is that one thing that we should keep is an independent secretariat that could be able to create also confidence relations with all stakeholders. But I don't think that it would be possible to recreate the same situation, and so this mechanism of the black box for electing the MAG members probably should be modified. And so maybe there should be a more transparent process, more open nominations, probably a combination of both things, an open mechanism for nominating people from different stakeholders groups, and at the end of the day, probably somebody that could take a decision and appoint some members among those that have been nominated with the support of Secretariat. But that's all for it.
Okay, thank you. Parminder?
Yeah, short comment on the composition. I mean, there are many issues which one would like to speak about, but just one, that since the nature of key issues around internet have moved on from what were the key issues around 2000, 2005, which were more infrastructural, to more social issues, the MAC composition should also reflect the shift in the issues. And we should be moving away from infrastructure access and CIS to the social issues which concern people, and therefore also the people whom we would like to reach, the marginalized groups. And I think that we try to go by a formula like, you know, civil society, technical people and stuff, but not really go out to those social groups which are not there. And the second issue about the program development, and I think a lot of time has been spent trying to talk about what should not be discussed, what would be too sensitive to discuss. And I think if the MAC doesn't bring out real issues in a very structured manner to the IGF, there could be thousands of people coming to the IGF, that the discussion doesn't take place well. And I think we need to structure it better. There was a discussion in the last 2 years that we should go towards key policy questions in each session. I think there was almost a decision taken to that effect. But I saw the IG4D session yesterday, and I don't know how it's going to be in sessions today, but that wasn't the fact. I mean, with this postmodern fascination with meshed reality and meshed lives, I think we really don't really get anywhere, and for people who need impact, that's important. Thank you.
Thank you. Petra?
Yeah, I will try to respond to a couple of things. I think the MAG composition and is one area where I agree with Anna, that this is when I in my opening statement where I said that there is something which we sort of have a consensus that something needs to be done, but we don't have consensus on what to do because we don't really know how to solve that problem. And one of the ways that the MAG, as long as I was on MAG until I rotated out, one thing that we tried to do more and more were, I claim, have much fewer meetings closed. And I think today all meetings are open, which means that it should not really matter whether you're a MAG member or not, much at least. The second thing is that the program paper that is produced, for example, for this IGF, is based on the input during the open consultations and also written statements and remote participation. And one of the things that I personally have been very strong advocate for is that MAG should be very careful about inventing themselves and writing things that did not come in through the open consultations, which means that the MAG should be more like, should invent fewer things themselves, but still have a responsibility that all the issues are covered, just like Bertrand mentioned. Regarding reporting back from the workshops, I know I myself have been fighting and hunting I don't know how many workshops and try to get them to report back, and they just don't. So this is not something that is a core issue. This is a bottom-up problem in the process.
Well, we are going to live up to that in this workshop.
I really hope so. Yes, thank you.
Nurani?
Thank you, Nurani Puna from NetNode. Well, I would actually just like to state that I think it's important to keep this process open. And I think there's a risk in over-formalizing the process, because by doing that, there's a risk that you restrict it and you stifle the process. I think the IGF has proven to be very capable at evolving and changing as new issues arise and as the needs change. I think it's fantastic that we can sit and discuss the IGF here at the IGF in an open and inclusive forum where everyone can participate. We have all sorts of people in this room and everyone can comment. So I only want to caution against moving these discussions into too formal and too strict environments, but to keep this open and allow the IGF to continue to evolve.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Kathy if we have any remote participant questions or comments. Okay. Well, let's open it up to the room. Bertrand, did you have anyone else?
One thing regarding the participation and the rotation, we are, and I just want to highlight this as a question or as a problem. There are two trends: the desire to rotate people and get new blood regularly, and the fact that because of the way actors are selected, there is a tendency to have some actors, particularly in the governmental space, who are permanently reconducted. It is not necessarily bad, because in certain cases, there is a need to have some major actors there, and it's better that they are there. I just wanted to highlight this tension, between something that is emerging as sort of permanent membership, not making comparisons with the Security Council, but you see the difference of status, and the way those people are selected. Second point is, in terms of making the process of selection more transparent, I was wondering whether using a light non-com process could not be useful, in particular by using people who are rotating out, who could form a sort of selection or vetting committee of sorts to facilitate the balancing of skills. And I would agree with Parminder that making sure that the composition reflects the type of issues that are going to be addressed is important. The last thing is, regarding the program, we've been struggling with that, making progress, but still struggling with what I would call the workflow of the IGF. And this stream of activity that should go from the workshops to roundtables, gathering the different workshops that are connected, whether we call them feeder workshops or roundtable, doesn't matter, and the main sessions. We're still struggling with that. I do believe that any type of subject should be able to evolve from the broad discussion workshops to the main session through an aggregation process. And that's one of the ways to explore.
May I just intervene here? Actually, people from the government side should say, sorry, non-com with us. We have other mechanisms of selecting people. So we need to keep that in mind.
I meant it mostly for the non-governmental actors, because I agree with that distinction.
Actually, I'm sorry, we had a question over here, and then we have you.
Thank you. My name is Marília. I'm from the Center for Technology and Society in Brazil. Well, first of all, I think it's important to differentiate the openness of the process and the real inclusion that is taking place. I believe that there are some issues that we have to address in order to promote real inclusion in the process. For instance, for developing countries, it's very difficult that the open consultations always take place in Geneva. For us, it's a burden to go there. It's easier for Europeans, but we have to take this into account as an example. And we have to seriously do some outreach initiative and ask ourselves who is not here and should be here. And maybe the organizations who are here, who fund people to come to the IGF, we should develop some kind of standards that would foster people who never came to the IGF to come here for the first time. Like Nick did this in Latin America, bringing people who never came to the IGF. That was one of the criteria that they have applied. And I think that it is important that we renew the people that are coming to the meeting. The second point is about the outcomes of the IGF. This has been discussed in the working group for IGF improvements, and we spent many times talking about how we should call it, outcomes, outputs, message, or whatever. And I believe that it's really important. As Dorari said, we are in an open space where everybody can participate. And we were really stuck in this discussion in the working group. And I would look forward for suggestions on how we could make the IGF more outcome-oriented without disturbing its non-binding nature, but also making sure that it creates messages and outputs, policy options that are discussed here, even though they are not consensus, but that can be fed into policy making in other fora. Thank you.
And that's a great segue to what is going to be our third topic. But let me just take this question, and if there are any other final comments, Bill, Teresa, on the substantive program, and then we are going to talk about the outcomes and the IGF. So, okay, go ahead.
Ronnie Coven, World Press Freedom Committee. Excuse my bad voice. I just wanted to talk for a minute about decision making and position taking, and more precisely, the nature of consensus. It seems to me that there's a confusion where consensus is being opposed here, in what I've heard, to the idea of democracy. Consensus is in fact a form of democracy. It is different from vote taking, but not from democracy. And I was brought up and educated in the Quaker system, and it was the Quakers who invented the system of consensus. It seems not to be very well understood. understood anymore in the UN system. But it does not provide that a minority of one or two can prevent a decision. What it provides for is that if somebody in a minority can demonstrate to those in the majority that the opposition to a position is based on a question of principle, then the others accept that there should be no decision. But if the person who's in the minority is only expressing a personal interest or a personal preference, then that is not accepted by the majority as a reason not to go forward. And I think that this is a little more sophisticated understanding of what is consensus needs to be restored to the way it's practiced at the IGF and in the UN system. Thank you.
Well, an editorial comment. I think this has been a fascinating discussion about consensus development. I really think we should find a way to continue this discussion. So, Bill? Yeah.
Yes. Make sure that goes in the report that we never see.
So, and there will be a report, Bill, okay?
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, I wanted to follow up. Actually, I think your intervention was spot on, as the British say. Consensus is an art form, and I would very much like to see us all get back to doing consensus-based work, where we agree basically that we are going to attempt to agree, and that if we hold principled positions, there are reasons for it. And everyone needs to understand that and work to resolve those issues where we can. At times, we may not be able to. I wanted to follow up on Bertrand's comments on the MAG and continuity, and the statement that basically at times it's a good thing to have people stay on. And I think that we can learn from other organizations where, as an example, boards or technical advisory groups will roll over a portion of their members or population on a regular basis. So if you have if it's 50% that turns over, 50% are up for selection, election, nomination, whatever, or you do it on 3-year terms, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. This works very well. It provides the continuity that's necessary, typically for organizations, and brings in new blood. The other thing I think we would find is even if we didn't have term limits, people tend to want to change what they're doing over time. So that I think that's important. Social issues, I agree that the social issues are very important, but I believe it would be a mistake for us to underweight the technical issues on the MAG or any of the other groups. The technology for the internet is constantly changing. And for us to believe that it will remain constant is a mistake. And then we will have, there will be issues where the social issues are attempting to drive technical solutions with no representation. And from my perspective, that's when we end up with some of the worst policies, is when the policy conflicts with the technology. And one of the things I like about the IGF is the ability for such a diverse group of people to get together from high level to low level, young to old, in a very broad spectrum, to discuss issues and then to take those back into the appropriate fora, whether it be technical, policy, wherever, to make truly make the decisions that need to be taken to drive the agenda that gets discussed here.
Thanks, Bill. And you and others have made some good suggestions and analogies to other models and examples, and I would encourage us to maybe capture, arguing against interest here, it might be helpful to try and capture some of that in the report as well. Teresa, you're going to have the final word on this issue, and then we're going to move on.
Okay, Patrice Lyons, and I'm with CNRI, and I've been involved for many years with the IETF and the various formative bodies. We were starting up the Internet Society, for example, years ago. And I would, Bill, I would agree with you. to actually just address social issues without having an informed knowledge or having at least a discussion of the technical implications of what you're talking about could lead to results that, although they are nice at the moment, they don't go anywhere. They're not practical. And I think that's one of the really good things about the IGF is that it's an fora where you can express both technical and social, and then the mixture of the two. Concretely, I was thinking that instead of in the MAG, for example, where you invite comments from outside, which is good and probably should be, people come with their workshop and the dynamic coalitions, that perhaps there could be substantive areas that have emerged in whatever discussions or even generated by the MAG in their discussions with the regional and national groups, where they could actually suggest a substantive area and then invite folks to address it. Now here, I'll give you a very specific, and I'll make it short. When I was in Hyderabad for the IGF, I talked with a young man from the government of India who was doing remote health care, and he was using the smartphones to diagnose and help with caring for people. Now that had a very social implication in the local community, but it was also very advanced technology. So if you, in the MAG, presented, say, healthcare as an issue, you might have participants that would be particularly interested in that topic, where they may never show up at an IGF again unless they're addressing what concerns them. But then you could say, well, what are the new technical things that are happening? What have you done? What are your experiences? Let's share ideas so that we can then inform one another about what's happening. And I think maybe that's something to think about going forward.
Thank you. I'll put in a plug for the emerging issues session after this, which is actually trying to take the same issues we're discussing at the IGF, but with that technical lens, and I think that is a good thought.
But I was saying it shouldn't be just technical.
Right.
You see, it's the interaction of them all together.
The different perspectives.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Okay, Jeanette, you want to?
Okay. The next point, we just decided to merge two different points we had due to time. So the next point will be about how to actually capture what we achieve at the IGF and how do we amplify the impact of the IGF. The two are obviously related and you can address it from any angle you like. So who of the panelists would like to speak up on outcomes and impact of the IGF? Both obviously needs improvement. Perhaps one should also say that many people celebrate the evolving dynamic nature of the IGF, but when it comes to capturing achievements, we haven't been too innovative over the last years. So Raul wants to start.
I will make a short intervention. Probably I will speak again later. But my point is that are we sure that we need to amplify more the impact of IGF? Because I think that's the IGF is having a big impact. So that's I think that's currently the international agenda is being set up based on IGF discussions, and in many forums, many organizations, and even in the governmental level, local level, it is taking they are receiving the impact of the IGF.
I mean, that reminds me that the notion of impact is perhaps a diverse one as well. We need to probably spell out what we mean by impact. So, Mr. Tevi, you want to speak?
Yes, I would like to say that the IGF has not been static. It's a process, and we should look at self-improvement, self-IGF improvement as we go along, and look at best processes and best practices that have been looked at. We should ask people for constant assessment and don't wait years later before you ask them for assessment. So after every IGF, after every process, we should be able to get feedback from them as to how we're moving. So people should be able to evaluate at the end of every workshop. We should look at how the MAG development process went on. And also, since IGF is moving from region to country, we should also study the improvements in the country and regional level also to see how it can feed into the greater IGF. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you. Good point. Next is Anna.
Thank you. Well, look at how IGF was in 2006, and now look at how IGF is in 2011. Well, there are some similarities, but the themes are totally different, aren't they? So IGF meetings should continue to be a non-binding fora, free from constraints, which are associated with attempts to reach negotiated documents. And we should not have this trap of negotiated documents. The dialogues between different stakeholders should be free from these constraints so that they can fully benefit from open multi-stakeholder dialogue, well-informed and seeking the development of contributions to social, political and economic growth, along with more shared knowledge and meaning among different stakeholders. The outcomes of IGF meetings are already very rich, I must say, with full written transcripts of plenary sessions, video recordings, and full written proceedings. These are already most and better organized outcomes than other large communication fora in area and anywhere. So dialogue and debate in a constructive way towards social, political, and economic growth, alongside with the perception of what is new, unique, and convergent or not in internet policy issues around the world, should be the key words to shape the outcome and the impact of IGF meetings. Well, but a chair's report could be a very valuable outcome to get a real sense of what level of consensus exists or not on some topics, or identify more clearly areas of disagreement, to clarify different points of view, and to signal progress. Finally, it might be useful to have an additional outcome in the form of clear-cut messages as bullet point statements, synthesizing the main points addressed in sessions and workshops. This could function as an outcome highlights that could raise the attention of different organizations to subjects of their interest. They could just be a compilation of up to 3 messages from each session, workshop, contributed by rapporteurs designated for each one of them, but never a negotiated document that will take a lot of time and result in the least denominator instead of a highest value pool of ideas and contributions. This approach would have the further advantage of allowing for different use interpretations by different parties, organizations, according to their varied interests and points of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Paminda, please.
Yeah, I can take on from what Anna said, that she says the difference between 2006 and 2011, and either I don't see much difference, and if I see a difference, the difference is that there was a lot of hope, expectation in 2006 and 2007. People were thinking that we are moving towards something. There would be more democratic participation in way the internet is shaping the society, and today that's ebbed. However, going back to the principal point of capturing outcomes, I think the relationship is back with what I started, to what avail and whether there is something which we are contributing to. Bill spoke about ecology of policy processes in the technical space, and he said things get discussed, and he used a word, and then they go back to an appropriate mechanism, and I pin him down onto that phrase. They go back to appropriate mechanisms. Now, which are the appropriate mechanisms to which the social issues about the way internet is impacting our society go back? And we're talking about the global issues of this kind. And my contention is that there is no appropriate place at the global level right now. It's being done in an undemocratic manner, and therefore, it's important that there is that place, and IGF has a relationship to that. And once we have had that thinking, and let's not talk about the composition of it, let's agree that there could be some appropriate space. Now, if there was an appropriate space which is making important global policy decisions, and I should also talk about Patrick, that I don't mean a particular central thing. There is an ecology, and there are central elements and distributed elements in that, and I don't ever mean that there's like one set of committees sitting and deciding everything.
So if there is that kind of body, I would say that IGF would change automatically. And I'll give you an example. Let's say there was a big assembly out there who was going to discuss search engine neutrality and come out with some kind of recommendations, etc. And we as multi-stakeholder groups were assembling on the side and discussing things. I know we would be very eager to get our positions in. If they come over and say, okay, we have heard you, so fine, and we will include your views. We would say, no, listen, we want to give some written inputs. We want to frame something. We want to have, there are two groups who are very much into this. They want to frame something. We would be doing those kind of things. So, I mean, I think it's all relative to whether we have a belief in a globally democratic system of developing internet-related policies. And this is the reason, I think, the way every civil society group have done. I've seen it around OECD. Technical committee doing it. Civil society committees doing it, business committees doing it. They want to give written inputs into those policy processes. In the same way, this group should give written inputs. It's not always that we would have one input from the IGF, but there should be an attempt to converge. It's possible that civil society groups agreed on, okay, we think that search engine neutrality should be informed by these kind of things, and they're putting a paper out. And there were some other groups who were talking about something else, and all of that goes out from the IGF into the policy-making process. It's possible on certain issues that committees of representatives of different stakeholders agree to certain things, and that goes out. And this has happened in all processes, including VC's Health Assembly, you name it. Outside stakeholders have been giving written positions into the system, and that's what we are trying to frame. I don't want to go to the details of what the question you have asked, how to do it through the IGF, because there's a written proposal by IT for Change and some other people about how key policy questions should be identified. MAC should work around them, produce background material. There should be working groups around it. Take it to the IGF. IGF has roundtables, try to precipitate issues, precipitate divergences, but wherever convergences are possible. Then after the IGF, the same group sits down, looks at what kind of things can be put together into a document which addresses clear set of key policy issues. And that's the only way other stakeholders are going to influence policy-making processes. And my last point is that I do think, I'm getting a little pessimistic about whether IGF will change. And I think after about 10 years, all stakeholders would review the fact that we did not invest enough in strengthening the IGF, because IGF is the only place where you could have, and I'm now already speaking about my dire prediction, got your views into policy processes in an authoritative manner. No? This came out of this big assembly. This is written down. The options are there. Why didn't you include them? We could have done it, but we are working somehow to our own detriment. And that's something I don't understand, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Parminder. Just as an aside, I'd like to remind you that in the MAC a few years ago, we once discussed the possibility to have roundtables that are more outcome-oriented for specific issues where we thought they had been discussed for several years and there might be a sort of consensus in the air. I don't remember, I really don't remember why we decided finally against it, but that was something. Okay, Raul, you're on the list. You're on the list anyway, but first it's Joy. I just wanted to say we have discussed these issues and they weren't as controversial as they might seem.
Thank you, Jeanette. Firstly, in terms of capturing outcomes and improving impact, I think some of the evidence of impact is right before us. And, for example, there are many ways in which civil society uses the outcomes of its inputs and its participation in the IGF in many policy processes beyond the IGF itself, at national level, to influence government regulation, to participate in the development of internet telecommunications policy. Many of these discussions are taken back directly to local and national level. So I think the absence of a single document or a single thing capturing those does not represent the absence of an uptake of those outcomes in particular places. I think, in addition, there are a number of places in the United Nations, for example, where the Internet Governance Forum can be offering its outcomes where it's currently not doing so. For example, making links with the United Nations Human Rights Council, where governments are discussing some of these issues in rather tangential ways that are not always connected to the same government representatives who are present here in these forums or indeed in other technical forums. So perhaps there are ways in which and in turn, the discussion in those forums influences government policy directly through their obligations either under international law or human rights standards. So perhaps my concrete suggestion there is that the IGF outcomes be tabled to a multiplicity of these forums to encourage their consideration in the processes that they are using, rather than necessarily the need to create a formal mechanism for that, but rather to offer those. And the other thing, of course, that APC has suggested before is the possibility of thematic IGFs. If there are particular topics where either at regional or global level it is felt richer, deeper discussion and dialogue is needed, then there is a possibility of thematically focused IGFs themselves. So, and in concluding, I would say that I pick up Patrick's point about those of us who do not do our homework and capture the outcomes of sessions, but neither do we draw on the wonderful rapporteurs and others who capture those points for us and use those in other places. So I would also encourage as a concrete suggestion the utility of those materials that we produce in the very process of our workshops. Thanks.
I think this is a very important point, that beyond the question whether we want more formal outcomes or not, there is a lot we can do just with improving reporting and using the transcripts and the reporting from the workshops in other venues or also in next IGFs. So next person is Raoul.
Okay, I will not recreate the discussion about why the roundtables were not implemented in IGF, that roundtables, the outcomes oriented. But the synthesis is that it is impossible to implement a negotiation mechanism. For having any kind of outcome, you need some kind of negotiation, and you need to define who will be participating in that negotiation. Those were the concerns that were raised at that time that were not addressed properly. So it didn't happen. But the point so is that I think that the IGF should remain in the way that it is. I think that it is very important what you said recently and what Choi said, that in regard that there are a lot of materials that can be used, and it is a kind of outcome. Anna also mentioned that. The kind of outcomes that she proposed is in part already exist. The reports from the workshops and the reports from the main sessions. I think that the IGF is already providing outputs, and I have an example that is regarding IXPs. For example, before 2006. The promotion of IXPs was something that, with few exceptions, were limited to the technical community and the ISPs. In 2006, in the first IGF, as part of the discussion of access, we started to discuss in a more broad, with a broader audience, the importance of the internet exchange points. As we have been discussing that the 5 years until now. Now we can see that many governments are involved in the creation of internet exchange points, and also many international governmental organizations like CITEL, CTU, and the ITU are spending money in promoting internet exchange points. So I think that it is an example of how the IGF have influenced the international agenda in one point. So I think that we are providing outcomes, and we are providing not only outcomes but guidelines. But it is up to each stakeholder to take their own conclusions about the discussions in IGF.
Thank you, Raoul. I'm sorry, I have to close the list because we are running out of time, and some people, we have already a long list of speakers. Sorry, it always privileges those who are quick and opinionated. So next one is Bertrand. Please keep it short.
We have a lot of data. It's not used correctly because the website is not powerful enough because of lack of resources in the Secretariat. There's an effort that needs to be done to do this. The WSIS Forum website is wonderful and empty. The IGF website is very full and ugly. The suggestion, in addition, is to use an open data approach. All the transcript, all the videos, all the elements that have been collected should be accessible so that everybody can reuse them, put them somewhere else, redo their own synthesis, and so on. Second thing is, we are making a mistake when we're talking about producing outcomes and synthesizing. As we are not the decision-making process, we don't need to have consensus positions. We're a decision-shaping space where the purpose is to show that there is no agreement when there is no agreement, and that there is agreement when there is. I.e., this is a question of funding again. I would suggest that a dedicated effort is made so that people in the Secretariat are added to be doing the synthesis of each workshop. It needs maybe 4, 5 people that would be doing the synthesis of the workshops with the organizers on an agreed template, reporting on what is agreed, what is not agreed, what are the positions of the different actors. That's all. No consensus, no negotiation. And the third element is I strongly support not necessarily the notion of thematic IGFs, because I was discussing that with some people and they were saying the notion of additional IGFs is worrisome. But thematic meetings that gather some actors who met at the IGF, who decided to go forward and bring more focused people, is an outcome. If people get out of here, who were working separately, and say we will organize one conference together for people who are concerned with this limited topic, that is an outcome.
Thank you, Bertrand. I think that also the regional IGFs play with these kind of outcomes of synthesis. Perhaps the global IGF can learn from that a bit. So now we have you, I don't know your name, I'm sorry.
My name is Ann-Katrin Agebeck, and I'm from the Swedish Media Council. I have been attending the last 3 IGFs and also the Eurodig in Serbia this year. And I am missing a very important target group, and that is young people. I can see that the participation of young people is growing, but they are still a kind of excluded group which have their own youth hours that is not meant for us. So what I really would propose as a vitamin injection for the future is to involve the whole generation we have out there who were born into the digital society. They have a lot of experiences. They are now young adults, and they have a lot of ideas. And I think that would really be something new and a new vitamin injection for the future IGF.
Thank you. It's also an important point for diversity. Then we have Frank on the left. Please keep it short. We are running out of time. Sorry?
Thank you.
We have no time anymore.
Thank you. My name is Frank Urbany, Urbany Associates. I've followed the internet with us for many, many years. The discussion here has been useful. I think there is somewhat of preaching to the choir. I think most of the comments have been how to improve a process that is working. That's good. That's helpful. A number of useful illustrations have been made as to how it's working, why it's good, and how to improve it. But it seems to me that maybe for future discussion should focus on a couple of points. One of the criticisms that is weighed is that the IGF needs to be empowered. That's somehow or other expressed in different ways. Empower the IGF, produce results, implement those results. Those are explicit concerns that keep coming around, and I think it would be useful as we go forward on how to improve that, the IGF mechanism, that we try to address and understand what is meant by improving empowering the IGF, for example. That seems to be a core concern. So I urge the discussants and the members to take that into consideration going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the statement. So now our last comment. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Mohammed Borhan. I'm from the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
And I would like to respond to the question about how to magnify the impact of IGF. And I would say that, in my humble opinion, a good idea could be to embrace the success stories of how people, especially the youth, use internet and use mobile internet for the developmental aspects. For example, we have Indians who are using the handheld devices for healthcare. We have Kenyans using M-Pesa. And today I just heard on the radio, the Kenyan radio, that they have developed M-Pesa so that they could allow people to give money to the landlords and so on. We have Egyptians in my home country who have developed a marvelous tool where they could direct traffic through remote observation centers, through tweeting. So if we could bring these people here into these kind of fora and have workshops, just success stories, they could, and then we could sort of display these success stories in the media. IGF could have a much bigger impact on a large group of people in different countries, in developing countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So we have only a few minutes left, and we would like to use them to wrap up and perhaps very briefly summarize what we see could be consensus points. We know this is a dangerous strategy, and we might be beaten up afterwards, but we thought we'd try anyway. So I will start with the first issue, which was on diversity. I will just mention a few points I thought I didn't see too much opposition to. The first one is that we should keep in mind that we have high expectations and high standards in terms of diversity compared to other international processes and organizations, particularly intergovernmental organizations. Then we looked at a few ways of improving diversity. There is, of course, the focus on regional and national IGFs, which diversify the participation in the overall process. And there is remote participation as a way of enhancing participation. But we should also keep in mind that the notion of diversity is more complex than it seems at first glance. Diversity is, as we mentioned here, a matter of regions, of point of views, of people and organizations and issues, not least issues. And the division between those does overlap or is sometimes also contradictory. And finally, the point that Anita made, and I thought we probably agree upon, is that we should neither romanticize the local nor the global level, because neither of them implies a guarantee for sound and accountable politics. So, before I go to the last one, perhaps you want to...
Sure. Very briefly, in talking about the program development, I think there was discussion about how the MAG is an important part of having a transparent and representative process, and as Raul said, engendering trust in the process. There was also discussion about what could be various concerns about whether there's been enough turnover and the black box concern about the selection process. As Patrick noted, it's difficult to think about what are specific solutions. The overall agenda development process, I think we had some good ideas about ways to, whether it's bringing more input from the regional and national level, or making sure that there's outreach happening to make sure that we really are getting a broad view of what should be the agenda for the IGF, and that is a very, not just transparent, but also an attempt to keep the agenda moving forward. Parliamentary noted how much the issues have changed over the years and questioned whether there was we should be focusing even more on social issues. Others said we should really be having a balance and a mixture of both things like infrastructure as well as social. But I think there was general agreement that the substantive agenda has evolved a lot over time and needs to continue to do so. Finally, we had a very interesting discussion about consensus development and the role of that, and Bertrand distinguished between kind of the thought process and thought leadership that happens at IGF compared to the consensus development. But I think we will try and capture those ideas that were discussed as a way to both think about the IGF process itself as well as maybe the internet governance process itself. And then finally, I know we're going to transition to the last issue, but we will be capturing these ideas. Marilyn is our rapporteur, so part of our process is to make sure that we capture what's here today and present a good report.
Thank you. Now, on our last issue, I will keep this short also because I didn't have enough time to think it through. So I would like to use Bertrand's last statement and base my own comments on that. I very much liked, and I think many people would agree to that, to understand the IGF process as a decision-shaping space. I think that is probably a consensus point of view. And also, that
issue shape.
Okay. I mean, also decision shaping doesn't mean, it doesn't imply at all that the decisions are taken at the IGF. Many people have said that people take the discussions to other fora that are perhaps designed to make decisions. So the second point that I thought that we could probably agree upon is that there is a lot of data that is underused and that we should focus our strategies on making better use of the data we produce here. And another thought I'd like to add in my position as a moderator is that perhaps the boundaries between what can be done within the IGF and what cannot be done within the IGF might be different between the national, the regional, and the global IGF, and that they might also differ over change, or that they evolve, these boundaries. So we should be open to other possibilities that seem impossible right now. With that notion, that comments, I'd like to thank you for this really interesting debate. We probably both like to thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as we did. Thank you.